I was told if I sang or if I preached, I could take my mask off for part of the service. And you guys didn't want me singing, so you get to hear me preach. I was picking my kids up from school on Friday, and I looked back in the car as we're almost home. My boys still had their mask on. And, I'm partly proud and partly sad because it's like they've gotten so used to wearing those things. It didn't even occur to them after wearing them all day at school to take them off when they got in the car. 8 months is a long time. We've been through spring, summer, and now fall with a very much adapted life because of this COVID that came in and just changed everything that we knew. It made us rethink so much about what we do in life and what's important in life. And it seems like it's been such a long time. At the same time, so many of us can remember those first few weeks of March when it was just a radical adjustment all at once, like it was yesterday. I hope that you've hit some rhythm. I hope that you and your family have been able to find some peace in this time. I hope that you've been able to figure out what's important. I see where just going by the sale of things, anything to do with outdoors, the sales have just gone through the roof for those things. A lot of people are finding some sanity outdoors. You may be one of those people who's found some solace in the outdoors from doing things together outdoors with your family. I do think I've heard many testimonies of families just really benefiting from being more intentional about spending time together. And not necessarily the big groups of family, as we've had to be careful about that, but just really focusing in on doing things together as a family. I think, I think all the way back to Genesis 2, in the beginning of creation, God created everything and it was good, and then God created Adam, and in Genesis 2 it says, it is not good for man to be alone. And I think the significance of family we see all the way back from that very early part of creation. And by the way, keep in mind, this was before the fall, which happened in the next chapter of Genesis. In Genesis 3, we see the fall. And so even before that, we see the significance of God creating man and woman family to be together. And in Psalm 68, verse 6 is one of my favorite passages. It says, God puts the lonely into families. Another one of my favorite verses comes before that. I'll talk to you about both of these things today and some of what we do as an agency at Arkansas Baptist Children's Homes and Family Ministries. But in Psalm 68:5, it says that God is a father to the fatherless. And I think what's so important for us is that we get to see, and I think we've been able to reevaluate what's important to us is also what's important to God, and that's connection, it's relationship, it's family. From the very beginning, family has been important to God. And so, we've seen this pandemic affect our world in lots of ways. And so I'm constantly looking at the news and I'm looking at what's going on. I'm reading the numbers like many of you are. And in recent weeks, I've not liked reading the numbers. And like some of you, I choose not to on a lot of days because it's so hard to see. But what is the biggest victim group because of this disease? Obviously, if we're looking at the deaths, we can see where older people have really been hit a whole lot harder by the physical aspects of this. But when I think about the 8 months that have gone by, and I think about the kids that 8 months ago didn't have family, and I think that 8 months is a long time, but 8 months is way too long to not have family. But I think, to not have family and to go through this without that structure, without that family support, wow, that must be challenging. And then I think about the families that were barely hanging on already. I think about even the young adults who are trying to get established in their careers and they're far away from family and they're unable to see family. I think all of us, whether because of the absence or because of the presence, has recognized the importance of family during the season. And so who is the biggest victim group during the season? I think it's those who don't have that family support that they need. And so I am fortunate and blessed and also challenged with the responsibility to lead a ministry that's all about families. As a matter of fact, if you go to arkansasfamilies.org, you'll see our website. We chose to do that because we want this state to know that nobody is more caring, nobody is more loving, nobody is more concerned about the families in our state than the ministries of Arkansas Baptist Children's Homes and Family Ministries. Our mission statement we chose last year, even before all this, we build, strengthen, and restore Arkansas families for God's glory. We believe that families are in a state of crisis and families need an advocate, and we want to be that for them. And as an Arkansas Baptist Church, you participate in that. You know, there's something called the cooperative program. If you went to a Baptist college, you may have had to learn about that in school. Most of our church members don't know a whole lot about it, but when we give together, part of our gifts go to support the ministry and missions in our state and around the world, and Arkansas Baptist Children's Homes is one of those ministries. And I get to lead that. In December of 18, I took on this leadership role with the ministry. I was compelled and challenged because I knew our families were in a state of crisis. And so I signed up for that with already recognizing that this is something that was dear to God's heart. I don't know if I would have signed up to lead a ministry that cares for those who are most dear to God's heart, the fatherless and the broken in spirit, during a pandemic, if I knew this was coming. But if we were honest, we wouldn't have signed up for a whole lot of things that we've signed up for during a pandemic. The reality is this caught our world by surprise and flipped us upside down and really caused us to evaluate a lot of things. But here's what I know. We've got to fight for our families. We've got to fight for our family. Like I have to fight for my family, and you have to fight for your family. And by the way, there's no family that looks like the ideal family. And that's one of the things that makes family so beautiful, is that we are all messy. We all do have our shortcomings, and our shortcomings are much greater than most people see around us. But that's what makes family family, is that we love through our shortcomings, we encourage and we challenge one another, and we lift each other up. And at the end of the day, we're there for one another. We need families like that. Our state needs families like that. I believe our church needs families like that. But family's not easy, with or without a pandemic. And so I believe we have to do everything we can to empower families. That's what we're seeking to do. Our agency, I'll give you a little summary on some of that. Our agency has 5 particular ministries that we believe empowers family for those who need it. The first ministry that I'll talk to you about, Connected Foster Care. Some of you heard about that a few years ago when we did a little promotion for that. Here's what I'll tell you. I'll give you some numbers. In June, there were 4,392 kids in Arkansas in the foster care system. That's pretty significant. And so that's 4,392 kids who the state of Arkansas is considered to be their parent. That's not great. But in November, there were 4,644 kids in the state who this state is considered to be their parent, their caregiver. I don't know about you, but I don't think the state is a very good parent. In June, there were 1,540 foster homes to take care of those children. I always get asked the question, well, where do they go if they're not in a foster home? Well, it's a really long answer, but they're in other forms of care. Some foster homes are caring for multiple kids. I'll talk to you about that in a little bit. But if there's not a foster home for them, they have to look for an emergency shelter or for a group home or for some other kind of care for those children. So in November, that number, 1,540 from June, went down to 1,504. And so let me break that down for you. In the last 5 months, there are now 252 more kids than there were in June, and there's 36 less homes. So let me ask that question again. Who's the biggest victim group of the COVID-19 crisis? As much as we can say the kids aren't as affected by the sickness, I just wonder how much their lives and their childhoods are being affected by what's happening around us. I believe that the people who needed hope the most before this crisis began need hope the most right now. And so if we were already in a challenging situation, if our families were already on a downward spiral, what has happened in 8 months to our families? I think we can see that there are less families who feel like they're able to care for foster children, and yet there are more children coming into the system, whereas prior to March, we were actually on a downward trend, and it was a very good thing. We were moving to a place where we had less and less kids coming into care because of alternative treatments and so on. Now that number has swung up, and the number of homes is swinging down. And so we desperately need families to rise up and say, even though our family is going through a lot, we're willing to help some kids have families during this time because that's what's desperately needed. So I also have 2 ministries related to what we're doing with connected foster care. One of those is Arkansas Baptist Ranch up in Harrison. If you're ever going through Harrison, I challenge you to drive through there. It's a beautiful campus. And what we do on that campus is unique to this state. We have 4 homes on that campus, and the whole goal of those homes is to bring sibling groups who are in the foster care system together under one roof. And so at any given time, we'll have sibling groups of 4, 5, 6, even 7 siblings all living in one of those 4 houses at the campus. And so the goal there really, we don't want kids to come there and live there forever. Although it's a beautiful place, we believe every kid deserves a permanent home. And so our goal there is to take care of sibling groups until they're able to go to permanency. This year we celebrated the permanency of several sibling groups. Can you imagine in your family deciding to adopt a sibling group of 7 and make them part of your family forever? We've had some families step up and do that this year, and that's been incredible. But one of the steps to that is to be able to take the kids who are in 4 and 5 different foster homes and to bring them together into one home so that they can get used to living together and then slowly introduce them to their new family. Or get them to where they can go back to live with a family member of their biological family. And so we do that at the Arkansas Baptist Ranch up there. We also have a big garden and horses and cattle, and the kids can participate with all that stuff. We also do something very similar in Monticello at the Arkansas Baptist Homes for Children. This is a ministry that our organization began with in 1894. We began in a crisis because there were so many orphans in our state who didn't have any family at all. And so we began because a lady felt a burden, and there were a group of people who had been gathering together and praying, and God worked in that group of people, and he also worked in this lady's heart at the same time and brought them together to form this ministry to orphans in need of family. And so what I've looked at over and over this last 8 months is we began because of a crisis. And so when a crisis hits, we can't hit the pause button. We can't hit the pause button and think, we'll pick this back up when all of this is over. Because there are children and families right now who need hope, they need encouragement, they need support. There are siblings who can't wait until all this is over to be reunified and brought together. They don't need to wait until all this is over to find a permanent family. And so we're doing everything we can during this season to try to make that happen. And so in Monticello, we do the same thing, 4 homes, keeping siblings together until they are able to move to their permanent home. Another ministry we have to families is our family care homes. That all fits under a ministry called Desired Haven Family Care. Desired Haven Family Care is all about family stability. There's 2 elements to this. One is we actually have a group home kind of setup where mothers with their children can come and live and learn life skills, learn parenting skills, learn how to cook and clean and manage their finances while they're also going to school or trying to find a job and earn money for themselves to be able to save and move toward independence. The beautiful thing about that program, it's 100% free for those families. The only thing we ask is that as they earn money, that they put a portion of it aside so that when they move out of there, they have deposits for their rent, they have deposits for their utility bills. They're able to be independent, most of them for the first time. And so we have 3 of those homes. One's right here in Little Rock. Some of you have been over there. Some of you have helped with those families. Some of you have gotten to know them. We have one in Jonesboro and one in Springdale. We figured out that the success of those programs is actually because of churches who will send people over to be advocates for those families. Because the biggest challenge in moving toward independence we found with those families is the lack of a support system. And so we've put advocates in place to be their support system, to connect them to a greater support system at the local church, and it's helped them to be successful. And so we took what was successful about that program and we moved it into the community. And so across the state, during this season, we launched a program of advocacy for vulnerable families. And so we're taking that mentor program, finding advocates throughout our state who are willing to reach out and support a vulnerable family and connect them to a support system. And what better time than during a season when people lack a support system to launch that ministry. And so for just a few months we've been doing that, and already we've raised up advocates around the state to make that happen. Now, I'm going to tell you about our 5th ministry, our counseling ministry. It's called Living Well Counseling. As a business leader, when the world shut down in March, businesses all around us are laying people off, right? They're closing doors. They're scaling everything back. We had to make some hard choices and do some of those things as well. But we sat around with our leaders. We said, if we don't step up and respond in this crisis, what really is our usefulness in this world? And so I want you to know from March until today, in 8 months, we've gone from 6 counselors to 22 counselors in our Living Well Counseling ministry. We've tripled our numbers of counseling from last year to this year. We even, in March, made the biggest, from a business decision, terrible decision. We made the choice for 3 months. We offered absolutely free counseling to anybody who called us asking for counseling. Because we believed if the world is in crisis, they need to see the church. The church needs to be able to respond. And we are the counseling ministry of Arkansas Baptist churches. And so in this season, through taking a step in the opposite direction than anything that seems intuitive or normal or makes business sense, we've seen God do something incredibly radical in our ministry. Our doors haven't had to close. We haven't been in financial trouble somehow. Amazingly, even in making those decisions, God has demonstrated his faithfulness. And I believe, let me say it like this, my view of ministry will never be the same as it was because of some of these decisions that we chose to make and because of seeing the way God responded in faithfulness when we made them. And this is what I know about our world today. People are hurting. People are in need. People are desperate. If you talk to people around you and you really get into a deeper conversation, it doesn't take long to understand they're barely hanging on. And so here's what I know. Going to church is a lot harder. Being the church has never been easier. If we can't be the church in this season, there's no use for us. People are hurting. People are broken. They're barely hanging on. And I just have to ask, are we being the church? Or are we waiting until all this is over so that we can invite those same people to church? The people who need the hope the most need it the most right now. And so, right now is the easiest time in our lives. Most of you are my age or younger. Right now is the easiest time we've ever had in our entire lives to be the church. I think the challenge is we've let the organization of the church be the church. And so we as individuals have forgotten that the church rests on our shoulders. It's not an organizational thing. It doesn't require a big Sunday morning gathering in order to be the church. We have to, as the individuals of the church, be the church. And I think it's hard for us because we're tired. We're worn out because life is hard, and in March it got a whole lot harder. And so many of us are barely hanging on. So many of us are tired. So many of us are worn out. So many of us are hurting. And what I want to say is that even in spite of all of those things, I think it's important for us to be the church. Because when we truly act as the church, I think the encouragement reflects back to us as well. And so Galatians 6:9 is where I focus this morning. It says, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. I don't know that there's a more accurate verse to our situation today, because I think the harvest is ripe around us because the world has lost the distraction of all the other things around us, and they're looking for hope. The world has lost the distractions that have kept them from looking for peace, and they need peace in their lives. They're searching for meaning in their lives. And so if we can not become weary in doing good and respond to the world in crisis with what we possess, I think we'll find the harvest is abundant. Our world is hopeless. But we have to remember during this season that we hold the hope of the world. Is that something that you believe? Is that something that by your life people can tell? Are we demonstrating to the world right now that we are the church and we hold the hope of the world? Because what I see when I look around is a lot of hopelessness. Do we truly believe that Jesus Christ came to this earth to live and to die and to be resurrected so that hope can be scattered across this world? Jesus came during a period of somewhat hopelessness. You know, when Jesus gave the Great Commission, it wasn't like there was this grand opportunity to go and tell the world about the hope that had come to the world. The first disciples suffered far beyond what we could even imagine. Yet they possessed something that they didn't lose sight of. They knew that what they possessed was the hope that the world needed. I believe right now our world needs hope. Our world needs the hope that we have, but we have to be the church. Our world is lonely. There have never been more ways to connect on the planet. There's never been more ways to communicate and talk. We have so much communication. I was thinking on the way in this morning about, I'm old enough, I guess, I've been in ministry long enough. I was thinking about when I was a youth pastor initially in my first church, the first several trips that we took. Do you know how we communicated back as we were traveling? We had an entire system that we created where I would stop and make a phone call to one person who then had 5 people that she was supposed to talk to, and each of those 5 people had 5 people that they were supposed to talk to, just so they would know we made it to New York. By the time it got down to the end, we were probably in Washington, but we had a system. And I think about how complex it had to be, that we had to think through all of that just to make sure that all of the parents of all of the kids who were on our trip could keep informed without me having to use my 100 minutes that I had a month on my cell phone to call each one of them. Right? Some of you remember those days. But now we have so many different ways to communicate. And our world's never been more lonely. Our world has never been more lonely than they are right now. Think about this. I saw, you can't trust anything in the news. I'm sorry, but I saw something in the news the other day, and the headline says 1 in 5 people who have had COVID are likely to have a mental health disease or something like that, however it was worded, a mental health diagnosis. That's really scary. 1 in 5 people who have had COVID are likely to have a mental health diagnosis. Compare that to the average population, guys. The National Institute of Mental Health says that 1 in 5 people is likely to have a mental health diagnosis. I mean, the relationship, there's so much out there that is just trying to scare us and create fear, and it isolates us. We have more access to health care and more unhealthy people. We have more access to mental health care and more unhealthy people mentally and emotionally, more ways to connect, and our people are more lonely. We're not finding the right solutions. Our world is lonely, and we're designed to connect. But we're not going to find the true connection that we're designed for outside of the gospel, outside of the church community. Because even that biological family that we're made to be a part of can only go so deep in connection, because there's a spiritual aspect to this. And until we get right with God and deal with the shame that's in our lives that prevents us from being able to connect, until we get right with that, we will be a part of the loneliness that exists in this world. And our world has never been more lonely than it is today. We yet again have the solution. Who called it social distancing first? I don't fully understand that, but whoever did that first, it caught on, and that's what we call it, social distancing. I've hated that from the beginning, but what I've come to realize now is that we are socially distant. We're relationally distant, and it's starting to really show up in our lives. But there's never been a better time for us as a church to show a lonely world that we care. We can't do it as an organization. We can't have some big event and invite our neighbors and friends here so that they know that the church cares about them. We have to be the church for the world. We have to learn how, as individuals, to be the church that shows that we care about the world. How are we doing that? How are you doing that? How are you showing the world that you care? All right, and then finally this. Our world is powerless, but we possess the only power that can heal this world. This COVID-19 stuff, it's no joke. But you know what the disease experts are saying? They're saying we dodged a bullet. Because if this thing was anywhere near as potent as they thought it was in the beginning, do you know how many fatalities we would have in this world because of it? If it was anywhere near as potent as it could have been, it would have really wrecked our world. And we would have had no more weapon against it other than these same little masks. And wear your mask. But don't you see that we're powerless against this stuff? We are victim to every disease and disaster that has or could come our way. Over 12 million cases and 250,000 deaths in the U.S. alone because of COVID. 55 million and 1.34 million deaths worldwide. 55 million cases, over 1.3 million deaths. That's just the ones that have been counted. That's not all. A record. Do you follow hurricane season? I'm from South Carolina, lived in New Orleans for a while, so I'm a little traumatized by hurricanes. My wife and I got married in July of 2005. Hurricane Katrina hit in August. So we spent the second 30 days of our married life with no running water, no electricity down near New Orleans. And so we keep up with hurricane season. This is the worst hurricane season since 2005, by the way. And for those of you who don't keep up with it, there were over 30 named storms this year. That's the first time ever. Those 30 storms caused over $40 billion worth of damage this year alone. For the first time ever, there's been at least one Category 5 storm every year for the last 5 years. We can't do anything about it. Our warning system's gotten better. For diseases, we've sped up a response to have a vaccine for COVID, and we're praying to God that it'll work. But the reality is, if we haven't figured it out yet, we're powerless to this stuff. We're powerless. And most of us have grown up in a world where we've been taught that spirituality is just a part of who we are, that our belief system is a part of it. Well, guys, it's time to realize that outside of the power of the gospel of Jesus Christ and outside of our connection to the creator of this world, we're powerless. And our world is right there. And so if we want to convey any type of power over these things, it's going to have to come from outside of ourselves. And the world needs to hear that there's power over these things that are crippling us. But we've become too comfortable living in this broken world rather than living for this broken world. We've become too comfortable just going to church instead of being the church. We've become too comfortable simply being different from the world instead of making a difference in the world. Let's get down to the basics. Let's get down to a John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. Do we have the love for the world that God had for the world that caused our lives to be radically changed? Or are our lives not radically changed? Do we not understand the love that came into the world to radically alter everything about us? If COVID can't get our attention, what will? What will get our attention not only for our life to be radically changed, but for us to start living for the radical change in the world that God gave his Son to die for? It's time for us to plant seeds of hope, connection, and healing. Our world needs hope. Our world needs connection, and our world needs healing. And we possess all of those things. Let's plant those seeds. And then one day, maybe we'll talk about the spiritual harvest that came because of this pandemic that entered our world and made us realize, some of us for the first time, what truly is important. Let us live on mission as a church. The world needs us to be the church. Let's rise up. Let's do that. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your faithfulness to us. God, we thank you for the gospel message and just how we can never deviate from that central truth in our lives. And we thank you for loving this world in a way that we don't even understand, in all that you sacrificed, so that we could know hope, healing, and restoration. God, may we now as your church represent you to a broken and desperate world. And God, may our world see you through us. God, we know that there's never been a better time to be the church than there is right now. Help us to live this out in our daily lives. Help us to reach out to our neighbors and friends and coworkers and colleagues and our family members who are desperate and hurting and lonely and broken. And God, may we together be the church as we've never been before. We thank you for your love that you have given us, your Son, Jesus Christ, so that through him all of these things are possible. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen.